and welcome to Round Robin. I'm your host, Robin McCormick, with the City of Hampton's Communications and Marketing Department. And today we're going to talk about where the city and personal responsibility meet, and the issue is grass cutting. My guests are Quincy Daniel and Phil Russell, both from the Community Development Department. Slightly different responsibilities, but they overlap on this issue. So, Phil, you were telling me that this is actually a change. There was a change to the grass cutting ordinance, and people may not understand exactly what their responsibility is.
Yes, ma'am. Earlier this year, I was asked to look into our former grass ordinance. And when doing some research, I enlisted the help of Quincy and the city attorney's
ditch guy, in case, you know,
he's our
super ditch guy.
He's our super ditch guy, but we also like to refer to him as our stormwater ordinance expert.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
But Quincy had a vast amount of knowledge to the new regulations that is Quincy's specialty. But our old grass ordinance was such that it didn't really specify some things that the citizens really needed to know. And one of the things was it just said they had to cut it to a reasonable height. But the courts have kind of ruled that in the past, these type things need to be addressed. It needs to be a standard that everybody recognizes.
Well, right, because I don't know, my reasonable height might be completely different from yours.
Correct.
And that's very hard for a citizen to know.
And different grasses are better at different heights.
Right.
So
but I assume we're not talking about anything in the 2 to 3 inch range here. We're talking about more extreme cases.
Yeah, a little bit more extreme. In doing some research, we looked at a lot of the neighboring jurisdictions in the Hampton Roads area, primarily Newport News, because they're our neighbors, of course, Poquoson. We also looked at Williamsburg, James City, Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Suffolk, Chesapeake. And we found that some of our ordinance wasn't quite what it really should be. So we undertook an effort to improve it. And when we did that, we made some recommendations. Quincy and I sat and did a lot of work together in order to help also our grass ordinance come into compliance with the state requirements for stormwater. We found that our grass ordinance actually contradicted our stormwater ordinance. So we had two ordinances that were really in conflict with each other. So we needed to correct that. So we did that, thank goodness, with Quincy's help, the city attorney's office, people from Parks and Rec helped have some input in it. So now we've got an ordinance that specifically says your grass cannot be higher than 10 inches.
Okay, so that is probably roughly what you were enforcing before, but it may be, people know now. They can go out and see.
They can go.
I know if I should call on my neighbor or not call on my neighbor.
Correct. Or they should know, hey, my grass is getting a little high. If your grass is so high that your dog disappears in it, it was probably too high anyway.
Oh yeah, my dog would disappear in 10 inches for sure.
So, but we made that change. So we put a specific height in there because we did have some questions. They said, well, I like my grass high, I like mine a little lower. The other thing we did was in looking at the city's ordinances with our jurisdictions, our adjoining jurisdictions, we noticed they had a lot of exceptions to their rules to help protect the water quality.
And that's where you're talking about the stormwater.
That's where Quincy jumps in.
So a yard standard might be different than a yard that backs up into a creek or some other things like that.
Correct. And so we used to send a notice, and we would say, okay, you got to cut your ditches and that type thing. And what was happening is we would have some owners, good intention, homeowners or property, maintenance people who would go out and they would actually scalp the edges of the ditch lines. And this created a real problem during storm events.
Now see, this is one I think that's a little bit counterintuitive. I think people think, oh, I'm going to help the city out by trimming this ditch so they don't have to come out as often. I don't like looking at it. I'm going to be helpful. But what you're saying is it's not really helpful in terms of the environment.
Right, and it also has a factor of erosion because when you have dirt and the grass, nothing to hold the dirt in place, then when the water runs over, it pulls the soil with it and creates erosion on the ditch banks.
So helpful people are actually contributing to a problem because this is where aesthetics maybe comes into conflict with management. If more dirt is going into those ditches, they're filling up, they're carrying dirt runoff and clogging up and contributing to problems downstream in the waters.
Right, correct.
Well, who would have thought? You know, I wouldn't have thought that through necessarily.
You know, I like to think that we're getting smarter as a city government, a state government. But the other big changes for us was the inspectors in the city of Hampton were spending a lot of time sending grass notices to the same consistent owners. So there was actually a change in the state code this year that says that one grass notice during the grass growing season, which for Hampton is essentially March 1st through November the 30th. We will send one notice to the listed owner in the assessor's records to the address in which the assessor's records reflect they receive mail. And this is really important because if you have a piece of rental property and you're still getting mail, but you've got that one rented out, then your tenant may get it and you may not get the notice. But we'll send that one notice, and then we will come out and we'll take a look at your grass. If you've cut it, that's fine. We appreciate your help. But the other big change for our grass ordinance now is we're requiring folks to cut to the back of the curb line or to the pavement. This may not seem real important to most of us because about 95% of our folks usually would do this, but occasionally we would get some folks who wouldn't do that.
So you're talking about the area between the sidewalk and the curb.
Yes, ma'am.
In people's
Yes,
usually
ma'am.
front yards. I guess it
Usually
could be
the
side
front yards,
but
those are the areas that the citizens who enjoy their property will utilize, and they, you know, their kids play there and everything else, but we had some folks that didn't quite do it, but it was never specifically laid out in the code. So now we've added that into the code. You know, the city, just like everybody else, we've cut back. The city staff is not what it used to be. But the other big change, and we have a lot of alleys in Hampton, is that we have added to the center of the alley. We had a real problem, not necessarily with the homeowners dumping in the alleys, but just allowing the alleys to overgrow and everything. Mm-hmm. And it put a real burden on the city homeowner, or the city homeowners who were trying to maintain theirs, and the city staff who was having to go out and cut them. So we're now asking the citizens to help us to maintain the city, which they enjoy, the part that they utilize, the alleys, and keep those cut also and cleaned up. So we made those changes. But the other big changes we made in our ordinance is like I said earlier, we put in a lot of exemptions. For instance, if you have a developer who goes in and he develops a new site, and it was a wooded site, and unfortunately Hampton doesn't have as many woods as we used to. Sure. But if it's a wooded site, you know, it's an unreasonable expectation to expect the person who's had a wooded site for 50 years to all of a sudden have to cut it. So wooded sites are now going to be exempt from our requirements of doing some of the underbrush. The other big area is the Chesapeake Bay District. You know, we are a waterfront community. We need to protect the bay. This is why Quincy and I got together on this. If you've got a piece of property and you're in a Ches Bay District and you've got a nice lawn and everything, we expect you to keep it up. If it's been developed and it's been cut and cleared, we want you to keep it up. But if you've got a piece and you've let it in a natural state, it's never been improved upon, then we expect you to not necessarily go in and start removing that vegetation, because that in itself is a violation of both state code and city code.
Okay.
So it helps to filter that water that comes off of these properties and helps to protect the bay. And we all want that good seafood that comes out of the Chesapeake Bay.
So a lot of times then this would be somebody's backyard, side yard, maybe there's a creek or something flowing through there, and what you have is not lawn, but marsh grasses.
Right.
Correct.
We don't want people cutting back the marsh grass. And in fact, as you say,
Correct.
it's illegal to do so.
Correct.
So we want people to know, we're not expecting that, please don't change that. But
That is correct.
there's a difference between your lawn and
There is.
native
There is a big
plants.
difference. And of course, you know, when I was younger in Hampton and I used to run around what I called the big swamp, which was really down off Sussex, which now is only an area that of wetlands, probably about 2 or 3 acres, but to me it was, you know, the vast Serengeti. You know, it was an area which was real pristine. We had a lot of crabs and shrimp and that type of things. And of course, as we've developed the city of Hampton, we've had more and more impervious surfaces. So that's why it's real important that we protect the waters and the nutrients and things that do flow into our ditch banks and do that grasses and those things, they're not really going to stop the water flow, but they are going to help to filter the impurities that we want to protect, which is one of the biggest reasons I've asked Quincy to join me here today, because Quincy and I, we've tried real hard to work in conjunction with each other, and I think we make an excellent team, and I think we try and do an excellent job for the citizens of Hampton, whom we all work for.
Well, now, let me ask you a question. My parents live out in the county, and out in the county, nobody cares if you cut your grass. Why does it matter to the city of Hampton if I cut my grass?
In any area where you've got a lot of people in an urban area, you have a lot of issues that contribute to a lot of things. Most people don't want some type of vermin in their yard. When you have a high grass, it does help to contribute to the amount of mice, rodents, even some snakes. Now, they're there anyway. We just don't see them as often, but if they're always there.
True.
You know, we have a vast variety of wildlife in Hampton that people don't see.
Definitely.
But we want to keep a nice, clean community appearance. It helps to improve the overall look of the city and the aesthetics. When our grass ordinance was rewritten, one of the big complaints I had received from a very vocal neighborhood that I love dearly, and that's Magnolia. They pointed out to me when I had first taken over my job, they said, your grass contractor, when he goes out and he cuts, all he's doing is he's knocking this grass down and he's just leaving the dead grass there and he's not doing anything. And I said, you know something, you folks are right. And so when we rebid our grass ordinance this year, because unfortunately we still have some people who don't cut their old grass, we changed our grass contract. Our grass contract now says the contractor's required to go out there and cut the grass, to get up large amounts of dead grass if it can't be mulched into there, to weed eat, edge the sidewalks in those areas out there. We think this is an important aesthetics for the city, but in doing that, we've also increased his minimum fee. He now gets a minimum fee of $50.
Now, so let me just back up for a second. So what you're saying here is if I don't cut my grass and y'all cite me for that,
Yes,
and I
ma'am.
still don't cut my grass,
Yes, ma'am.
you send a contractor in.
Yes, ma'am. We
And
will send a
then you bill
contractor
me.
in, and then we will put a lien on the property, which unfortunately includes an administrative fee. So you're going to have a minimum charge of $200, $50 for the contractor and $150 for administrative fee. And people say, my gosh, $150 administrative fee. But in looking in our surrounding areas, that puts us right in line with everybody else. We had not changed our administrative fee in years. And we're now finding that with some gentle persuasion such as this, we're finding that folks are a little bit more inclined to actually do it. I actually had a gentleman who's an absentee owner. He lives in California. He told me it was actually cheaper for us to go out and cut his grass
Well, you know,
than
that's
it
what I was gonna
was
say.
for him to hire a contractor and keep it cut. And he unfortunately lives, or his property is adjacent to some other citizens who don't necessarily share his sentiments. So.
Well, and that is where you get that conflict. If I let my grass grow, it affects the value of my neighbor's home in a way
does.
that it doesn't out in the county because my parents own, you know, whatever it is, 10 or 12 acres of land or what. You know, they're not bumping up against each other
That's exactly
the way
right.
we are.
That's exactly right.
And yeah, I can see $50 is not a bad price to pay for having your lawn maintained.
Yeah, but when you pay the $50 plus the $150, and
Then you've got an incentive.
and the other big change is now with our new software program that we've instituted, we have a new system called Basic Gov. The inspectors have a better ability to be able to keep track of these. Before they had to kind of, well, did I cut that? Did I not remember that? My inspectors now have the ability to check if it's a vacant property. They will, once the grass is either cut or our contractor cuts it and we close it out, it will automatically reschedule a reinspection 14 days.
Well, and this is where the administrative fee comes in, partly probably paying for the software, but paying for y'all's time. And I think the theory is that the people who violate the ordinance should pay for the inspectors more than the general taxpayer.
Correct.
It's leaning toward a more user fee approach.
Correct. Now, the initial cost of paying our contractor comes out of my department budget. When the fee and the lien is put back on the tax rolls, that money, my understanding is it goes back into the general fund. So it keeps the other citizens from having to really pay for that. The
Right.
taxpayer who owns the property eventually has to pay it. We have a lot of abandoned properties in Hampton.
Yes,
So
we
those
do.
liens build up, but eventually they do get sold and they must be settled upon closing.
Okay, so let's recap the main things, the main takeaways for citizens here. Grass height no more than
10 inches.
10 inches. I was going to say 9. Okay, 10 inches.
inches.
It is the homeowners or property owners' responsibility to make sure that you cut between the sidewalk and the curb, or all the way to the curb, depending on
The back of the
what you
pavement,
have.
if you're unfortunate not to
Goes-
have a sidewalk,
That's right,
you go to the back of the
pavement.
curb or back of the pavement.
And alleyways, I mean, I know they have them in width. I used to live in width. Ours wasn't overgrown, at least where I was, but
Right.
I think in some
Buckrow, width.
Buckrows, those older
The older-
neighborhoods.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we're asking people to do that, and we're asking people not to trim their ditches, right?
Right.
Okay, so here, there's the do's and don'ts today of grass cutting. And a reminder that if you don't follow the rules, if you don't cut your grass, we will have to send someone in, and you are responsible for paying for that.
That is correct.
Okay, anything else you want to leave people with before we close out today?
We appreciate the citizens' help.
Absolutely.
Without them to help us to improve the city, we wouldn't be here. But sometimes we need a little education. This new ordinance went into effect July 1st of this year. So we've been
That's 2013, and I'm just going to say that because
2013.
we'll keep
Yes,
airing this
July- yeah,
episode
yeah,
when the
July
grass starts
13.
growing again in a big
July
way.
1st, 2013, you're exactly right. But feel free, if you've got any questions, please call the 311, and they'll have somebody contact me, or they'll put you in touch with me. I'll be happy to answer any of the citizens' questions we can do.
Okay. Well, thank you, Phil, and thank you,
you.
Quincy, for coming by.
You're welcome.
And don't forget, if you have any questions, call 311, or if you want to report a situation where you think the grass is out of control or there's a problem, you can also call 311 or 727-8311 from a landline. Thank you for watching.